Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first lecture of what's going to be a lot of different lectures that we'll be putting on our assignment page in like a flipped classroom format. And we do this, and I probably would have already explained to you this in class, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again. We do this because sometimes we'll spend class time working on skills and other things that we'll need for our AP exam. So instead of using class time, we'll do a flipped classroom assignment when you don't have reading, but instead you'll get to look at my pretty face. There you go. You don't get enough of it, so here's more. Now, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, Ancient India. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. One of the first things about Ancient India is that it's centered around the Indus River Valley. Now, we're going to look at a map in a second, but let me go ahead and explain. India is shaped somewhat like a diamond. Rivers and mountains border it from the north, east, and west, and then the sea borders, or the ocean borders from the south. And so it's kind of like 2 points, north and south, right? And we are focusing in early Indian civilization, we focus on the western side, which is at the foothills of a mountain range called the Hindu Kush, and a river known as the Indus. And so this Indus River flowed down from those mountains and into the sea that bordered Saudi Arabia and Mesopotamia. Okay, so it's the Indus River Valley. Many times we will call India the subcontinent. Now, you know from our maps and our map work that we've done that the AP refers to India as South Asia. Also, you will hear it referred to as the subcontinent. It is essentially a continent unto itself because it is isolated from the north by the tallest mountain ranges in the world, the Hindu Kush, and then, of course, the Himalayas to the east, which is the tallest mountain range. We have to the west, we have the Indian Ocean, and to the south, there's the Deccan Plateau, which we'll talk about later on the geographic regions of India. But northern India is actually isolated from southern India, as India itself is isolated from the rest of Asia. Right, so sometimes it's called the subcontinent because it's almost a continent unto itself. Right, now, like the other river valleys we've studied, one of the things that governs the river valley is the idea of flooding and planting and harvesting, those 3 seasons. Right, and in the Indus River Valley, that was the same as Mesopotamia and as Egypt. However, the source of that flooding was different. Right, because we talked about Egypt, Mesopotamia, it usually came from snowmelt from the mountains that would flow down the rivers in the spring. Those areas of the world, they never get a lot of rain, and so it was mostly from snowmelt. However, India does get lots of rain, and it's centered around a weather system that occurs every year, seasonal weather system known as the monsoons, right? And so I've got on our PowerPoint here just a brief description of the monsoons and when they come. We have a wet monsoon season and a dry monsoon season in India. From about October to May is the dry season where the winds blow from the northeast to the southwest, across the Himalayas, and onto India itself. And there's very little rain during that time. However, around spring, June, late spring, I sound like a meteorologist here, the winds shift and blow from the Indian Ocean over India and bring rain, lots of rain, every day rain. And so we're talking months and months, right? And that's the rain that would cause the rivers in India to flood and therefore leaving silt on the banks, and people would farm in that silt. And so like Egypt and Mesopotamia, India would grow a very large civilization, but their source of that flooding is going to be different. And also that source of the flooding, as you can already imagine, would be a lot more precarious than Mesopotamia or Egypt. Having that much rain and that type of soil is going to make it very dicey to live in a river valley in India. More so than definitely Egypt and even Mesopotamia, right? So let's take a look at what we're talking about. All right, so here's our map. We've covered, here's the river valleys that we've covered. We've covered Mesopotamia, we've talked about Egypt, and now we are on to the Indus River Valley, which is here in purple. The arrows will describe migration, which we'll talk about in a second, but let's take a moment to talk about what we've just discussed. Here we have the geography of India. The Himalayas are on the Chinese side, which is the northeastern side, and the Hindu Kush will be here. The Indus River is right there at the foothills of the Hindu Kush, and so you can see how that the river would flow down into the Arabian Sea on that side. Now, the weather systems we're talking about, one of the things that affects Indian weather system, why there's so much rain in the wet season, is because of the mountains. And we'll see this effect in different places in the world. We're going to talk about it in South America with the Andes Mountains. But when you have a weather system that pushes over an area like India, it's going to hit those mountains, essentially what people have called the roof of the world, and those clouds are going to be unable to get over those mountains, and so it will dump all their moisture onto India. By the time they're able to wisp across the Himalayas, they could lack any moisture or water at all, which leads to this desert here in the Tibetan Plateau, right? So it's a very dry area on this side of the Himalayas and very wet, especially in the spring and summer in India. Now, another way this weather system is going to shape history is it is a way for sailing ships to go from Mesopotamia and Egypt, and later we'll learn Greece and even Rome. During the monsoon season, the wind will blow ships to India, which it will be able to trade with cities along the coast and then in the interior. And then they have to wait, those ship captains have to wait until the dry season for the wind to shift and blow their ships back home, right? And so that became the trade route in ancient India, and we're definitely going to discuss that. So the monsoons affect the flooding and the weather, but they also affect trade in that area of the world. Now, looking at the arrows here, let's go ahead and talk about this. India was settled very early in the archaeological record of civilization, right? Migrations right out of Africa. We believe people migrated along the coast here and eventually made it to South India, right? But that's prehistory, so let's focus on the civilization history, right? So the first civilizations that we see are along the Indus River Valley. We believe these people might have come by ships down the Persian Gulf and into this area here to build the civilization. Other large migrations that we'll talk about again this chapter will come across land, across Mesopotamia, through today's Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, and down what is going to be one of the most famous trails, roads for migrations in the history of the world, which is the Khyber Pass, which goes through the Hindu Kush Mountains and down into northern India. Okay, so 7000 BC, nomadic herdsmen migrate through the Khyber Pass, which is that northern area into the Indus River Valley. They were sheep herders, right? They had domesticated sheep, like we talked about in a couple of chapters ago, and they moved those sheep down into the lush valleys of northern India. Around 3200 BC, these people began to farm, and so that fits the schedule that we've talked about in different areas of the world where people started to farm. They farmed along the Indus River Valley when the flooding would happen and the waters would recede, and they would start planting in their very rich soil, the silt. Around 2500 BC, we see the first cities emerge along the Indus River Valley, and they build a very complicated and complex civilization, a very sophisticated civilization with over 100 cities. Now, here's what we know. To go ahead and let you know, we don't know a lot about these people, and we don't know a lot about these people because they had a form of writing, and we can't read it. We don't know what it says, right? I think probably when we talked about Egypt, we'll talk about the Rosetta Stone, which is a very lucky find for us, which allowed us to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics into other languages. So now we have Egyptologists in the world who could read hieroglyphics like they're reading a bedtime story, right? They just know it. We don't have that luck with the ancient languages of India, right? There's scholars right now trying to go through those languages, trying to figure out what they say and try to decipher them, yes? And so we know they were very complex people, very intelligent people, but the only thing that we can guess about them is what they've left in the archaeological record. So what we have to be is kind of archaeological historic detectives and have to look at what they show us and then try to decide what it all means, right? So take a look at this evidence, right? Sophisticated civilization. Cities were highly planned and all the same. So if cities are highly planned and all the same, what does that tell you about a civilization? You've got over 100 cities, and they're not the same size. Some are bigger and some are smaller, but they all have the same buildings in the same place, government buildings, temples, and they're all based on the same model. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that there was probably a very strong central government, either a government or a king that could tell a people in 100 cities, you're going to build this the same way, and they do, right? And they're very sophisticated. And we'll look at the pictures, there are photos, sophisticated streets, and buildings and neighborhoods in these cities that are laid out on a certain pattern, and they're all laid out the same. So strong central government is what we think. Oven-made bricks that are standard size, and so again, a very strong king or very strong government would say, here's where we're going to build it, here's what we're going to build it with. Standard size bricks in each building, and we're going to take a look at the photos, and it's pretty amazing. They look like what would be an old building downtown, right, that hasn't been used in a while, like a warehouse or something. Those types of red brick. It's pretty incredible. They had plumbing and sewage. They were very clean people. They had indoor plumbing, and they would push the waste out of the city. We're going to see drains and things that they would use. So they learned early on that waste was not only gross, but it was also unhealthy. And so they were able to get that out of the city. So they designed these things. We talked about different civilizations were able to design technological advances that helped them survive. And this is one of the technological advances of the Indus River Valley, the idea of waste and sewage pushed out of the city away from where people live. And then, of course, we have a rioting system, and we don't know what it says. We'll look at examples of it in a minute. We think it was pretty complex, but we just don't have a clue yet because we haven't found that Rosetta Stone that would help us translate it. Okay, so those are our clues. Let's continue on. All right, so the religion. And again, how do we know about the religion if we can't read the writing? Well, there are pictures, there are carvings, there are things like that that are going to give us hints about what is sacred to these people and what they worship. And also, as we'll learn, spoiler alert, that other people will come in and blend their culture to the early Indus River Valley people. And then we will get what we know as Hinduism. And so when we know Hinduism very well, but we have to decide what was an early Indus River belief and what came a little later with the new migrants that came into India. So we'll talk about that in a second. But here's what we know. The idea of religion, they believed in, we'll talk about the god Shiva, which is the god of the idea of destroying and reincarnating. Mother goddesses, fertility goddesses, and cows were sacred, right? Which is a very Hindu thing today. People that are Hindu do not eat beef because cows are sacred. Mother goddess we see in all religions. There's a mother goddess in Egyptian society, mother goddess in Mesopotamian mythology, right? So we see that. And then the fertility goddess, of course, we go all the way back to the Venus of Willendorf and talk about fertility talismans and goddesses, right? So economy and trade, they had a very large civilization that would trade. And the evidence we have of that are something we'll look at that are called seals. Now, I don't mean the thing at SeaWorld that claps his hands and balances the ball in his nose. I mean something that would be a label of a package or something. So what we have is like a stone, a square stone tablet that's been carved on. Some of it is writing, some of it is pictures. And we imagine them taking that and sticking it in clay and then stamping it onto a package to say this is grain or this is another item and sending it off for trade. And we find these stamps or these seals in India, of course, but we also find them in Mesopotamia, which means that they traded all the way to that River Valley civilization as well. So we'll take a look at the seals. So around 1750 BC, the civilization begins to decline, and we don't know why. What's funny about the ancient world, and we're going to go over this quite a few times, is we have civilizations that grow and become great, complex, trade, wealth, all of it, they have it, and then they just disappear. Right? And the archaeological evidence has to tell us what happened. And here's what we know, but we haven't really got a definitive answer yet. If you have a people that lived in over 100 cities, and some of them were massive cities, and then they all of a sudden just move away or disappear or migrate out, we have to figure out why. So thinking about it, maybe you think, okay, they were invaded, and their cities got burned down, and the people died, and the rest of them fled because they were afraid of these new invasions. Well, that was a theory for a while, except the archaeological evidence doesn't support that theory. If you have cities that have been burned, you dig down in those cities, and eventually you'll find a black layer where the city has been burned. We don't have that in any of the Indus River Valley cities. You'll have mass graves with bones where people were massacred and then thrown together in a grave or at least killed in the same spot. We don't have that in the Indus River Valley. We also don't have a lot of weapons that we find, not a lot of arrowheads, not a lot of swords or knives. And so we don't have a lot of evidence of war. So we've kind of discounted that theory as not likely, right? So other theories. Well, remember, we're living in an area where a weather system that rains for months causes our flooding. And we're not, like Mesopotamia and Egypt, living in a desert. Okay, so when you have dry soil like desert, it can flood, and then the floods can recede, and the soil is still there. India, of course, is a tropical climate. It's very much like soil, wet soil, jungle-type soil. And so when you have too much rain, science now, we have erosion. And that erosion, of course, can cause land, farmland, to just sink back into the river. And maybe it was too difficult for these people to live in the Indus River Valley and try to manage this type of flooding. So much rain, loose soil, and they just we can't do this, and they left. Remember, if you have 100 cities, then you have to support a lot of people. And if you can't farm that much food, the people are going to stay in the cities and starve. They will move away. And so that's really kind of a likely theory that we think. Sometimes the Indus River Valley was so unpredictable and the soil was so loose that one day your house could be near the river and the next day your house could be in the river because the river shifts. Even to this day, the river will shift with lots of monsoons, right? And so maybe that could be it. That's a very possible reason, is that flooding just became so unpredictable with natural disaster, and people gave up on that civilization and moved into the interior of India in smaller groups where they could survive better, right? And so uniform city planning, uniform housing. We have a wealthy part of town, and like a industrial part of town, but the housing all looks the same in each city, right? We have non-essential goods. We dig down in these archaeological digs, and we don't find weapons or arrowheads. We find toys, little carts with wheels on them, little wagons and things like that children used to play with. And so that's a sign of a prosperous civilization, a civilization that thinks of family and children, values those things. And so that tells us that they were a peaceful people. They didn't worry about so much building walls like in Mesopotamia or designing weapons out of bronze like in Egypt. They were interested in trade and being prosperous and also taking care of the unit, of the family unit, right? And so a peaceful people. That's another reason why war and invasion is probably not the reason for the decline. And again, very few weapons found is what we just talked about, right? And so we think it was just naturally too hard to live in this area. So these early people began to migrate out into central India. Now, after that happened, let's see where I am here. Oh yeah, here's some pictures before we get ahead of ourselves. Let's look at some photos. This is one of the major cities of the Harappan civilization, and this is called Mohenjo-daro. And I think I'll put a picture of this on our quiz. This is another area of the city. Take a look at the houses. You see the outlines of the houses and the walls there, and you have a street, or of course the streets weren't very large because they didn't have large vehicles like we had. They probably had two-wheeled carts, and so the streets did not have to be large. But the brick is very standard-sized brick, more like even modern brick today. This is one of the photos that we had on our quiz, and we believe some of you actually wrote this in your quiz and drew a picture of it. And you're right, it's a bathhouse, is what it is. We believe it was a bathhouse. It looks like a pool. It's got steps going down into it, and it's got raised walls, and the brick is very solid and stuck together. So we believe that people would come here and bathe and like a public bath. Also, I wonder if I have this photo. I do. They had ways of draining it. So they would drain the water and then put fresh water in. And they also had a space underneath where you could light a fire and heat the water. And so the water can be hot, right? And so technological advancements and not for war or for protection, but more for just luxury, more for just comfort, right? This is an example of walls that are higher in Mohenjo-daro. And you can see the guy here walking down a street. And look how high the walls are. And so this would be what a scene you would have in Mohenjo-daro would be like, right? So pretty advanced civilization. All right, these are examples of stamped seals, right? And so like I said before, we have squares, and the squares have writing. The glyphs here at the top are the writing that we have no idea what it says. But look at what else we have. A cow, sacred cow, right? We also have an elephant, a sacred animal to Hinduism. We have, this looks like a rhino. Remember, this is the ancient world, so I'm not saying there weren't rhinos in India at the time. There could have been. More cows here, more bulls. And so we see the value of these animals that are going to translate into Hinduism and continue to be sacred to these people. And so this is what we know about their religion. This is what we think we know from the seals, and where the idea of the sacred cow originates and the idea of the elephant originates from the earliest people that lived in India, and the earliest civilization, which is the Harappans, right? Now, what these were used for, as we said, was they would be like stuck into clay and then stamped onto packages or jars or whatever to be sent to other places in India, as well as out into the Arabian Sea and over to Mesopotamia. And we find these seals in Mesopotamia as well. So we know that traders must have gone there with the monsoon winds and come back on ships with sails, right? Okay, so the next people to come into India we call the Aryans. Now, the thing about the Aryans is that they were a very large group of people that began to migrate out from the Caspian Sea area, which is just to the northwest of India. they would also migrate into Europe and migrate to other places and also begin to migrate into India. Now, the original theory was this, that these people moved into India and invaded and therefore conquered the Harappans and then dominated them for a while until they assimilated or blended together to form a new society. Now, we know that's the old theory, and there's a lot to that theory that has to do with even like a racist overtone, which we'll talk about when we get to the idea of imperialism. And historians that were living in the 1800s that would create these stories about how the white Aryans went into India and conquered the dark people and then ruled over them. We know that invasion is probably not the answer, because the people of the Harappan civilization weren't invaded, they migrated out. And then the Aryans came in. So the theory that most people, so the invasion theory is more of the imperialist 1800 theory. We don't necessarily believe that anymore. What we believe is that it's probably more of a migration. It's a migration of people from around the Caspian Sea area that migrated India, and it's just a second wave of migrants after the Harappans and settled in India. Maybe they dominated the natives for a while. They were a more warlike people, but eventually, what we know is they would blend together with the local population and create the society that we know as Indians today. Right now, if you were to go to the University of Delhi, or if you were to go anywhere in India, they might introduce a theory known as the origin theory, which is that Aryans actually originated in North India and then moved out to other places. So India is the origin of this this culture that would eventually become the culture that would influence Europe and as well as the Middle East. And so they're very important people to history. And if you know, we're not going to get into this now, but if you know the World War II history, you'll know that other dictators in the 20th century used the idea of Aryan to make up their own stories about their origin, right? Keep that in mind. Now, so let's go with the migration theory. That's the one that you're going to hear in most college campuses and classrooms, and most scholars believe that there was a migration and then a blending of cultures that would create Hinduism or Indian culture, right? So the Aryans come, and it is true that they were lighter skinned than the Harappans that lived there before, because the Aryans called them Dasas, which in the Sanskrit, which is their language that we can read, Dasas means dark skinned. So the Aryans were lighter skinned, the Dasas were dark skinned, and human nature tells us that there probably was rivalry or conflict or friction between them at first, but we also know that they would eventually blend together. All right, so the Aryans move into the area around 1500 BCE. Okay, they move into India through the Khyber Pass, just like the Harappans did, and they bring with them an oral tradition of stories. They are nomadic people, and nomadic people, as we have learned or will learn, bring stories with them. They never write anything down because they never stop to write. They just tell stories around campfires, and the stories are of their histories, of heroes and gods and the creation of the world, those mythologies that we've already studied, right? Well, their mythologies were eventually written down when they moved to India and settled, and they're called the Vedas. Yes, and the Vedas are an amazing group of poems and stories. The longest poems in the world are from the Vedas, and they are essentially the mythology and the beginnings of the world according to Indians, according to the Hindu culture. A couple of examples of Vedas: we have the Rig Veda, we have the Mahabharata, which are just beautiful, long poems documenting heroes and the fight for justice and all that stuff. Very fascinating stories. And they also are going to create what we know as the caste system, which is the social classes in India that's very heavily tied to their religious beliefs, right? And so at first we believe that the Aryans were the dominant caste, the Dasas were the lower caste. Once that blending begins, then as we read in our textbook, the caste depends more on occupation than it does on color of skin, and the castes are called the Varnas. Each class is a Varna. And then we have the Jati, which we read about, which is the subcaste, okay? All right, so here's the Mahabharata is one of the best stories, and we can't get into it, it's too long, but it involves a royal family with competing groups of brothers, and they fight this war that will eventually destroy the world. But again, destroying the world isn't necessarily like the Western idea of destroying the world, where it's over. Destroying in Hinduism, of course, means to die and be reborn. And so the earth is reborn after this war. And the god that causes this to happen, because it's a necessity, is Krishna. And Krishna is here with his mighty bow, and Krishna is dark-skinned. So there you have it, folks. That's how we know that society is blended, and there's no real difference between light and dark anymore because the hero of the Mahabharata is a dark skin. So why would Aryans, who dominate society, would have a hero with dark skin, right? But so that's the timeline that we see where assimilation actually has finished, is when the Mahabharata is completed and the idea of the dark-skinned hero of Krishna, right? Oh, it's a good story, though. It's a good story. Okay, so the caste system begins in India once the assimilation is complete. And as we said before, it's dominated by ideas of religion, ideas of Hinduism, right? And so at the top of this pyramid is going to be the priests. The priests are the religious leaders, and therefore they are on the top. Now, it's easiest to remember these castes by thinking of them like a body, right? And so the Brahmins, everything on the body has a purpose. Yes, the brain, and the heart, and all that stuff. Well, of course, the ancient Indians aren't going to get that detailed with the body, but imagine that the Brahmins speak to the gods and speak to the people. Just like the priests in other river valleys we've studied, they are the conduit or the communicators between the spiritual and the physical. So they are the mouth of society. So the Brahmins are the mouth. They speak for the gods and they speak to the people, right? They are the head of the caste system. Below them you have the Kshatriyas. The K is silent. Kshatriyas are warriors. So if we're going to have a body, what would a warrior be on the body? The arms, right? So the powerful arms of the body are the warriors, and of course their job is to protect society from the enemies, right? And from without and for in. They're kind of a governing nobility class, just like we studied in other river valleys, and we will continue to study this nobility class that kind of is the government of the ancient world, but their job is protect. They are Kshatriyas. They are the arms. Now the Vaishyas are the merchants. They trade and move goods back and forth from different civilizations from other places in India as well as outside of India. Just like the Indus River Valley, that trade continued under the Aryans. And so the Vaishyas are the legs of the society. They move society along through wealth and trade and also knowledge. They're the ones who will go to other places and get new knowledge and bring it back to India. And so they are the movers of society. And finally, at the bottom, we have the Shudras. And the Shudras are the farmers. They are the workers. They work with their hands. They provide food for society. They provide goods for society, and therefore they are the feet, the foundation of society. You could not have a society without the foundation, right? They are the base. And so each group, according to Hindu belief, each group serves a special purpose, a purpose that is essential for the life of the community. So, if you are a Shudra, your job is very important. If you are a Brahmin, your job is very important. So everyone has a special view of their place and what their job is in society. Now, there are people who do not fit into this pyramid. Those people are called pariahs, and pariahs are outcasts. Now, outcasts, you can be an outcast for a number of reasons. Outcasts are foreigners. Outcasts are people who work with the dead bodies or dead meat. They're unclean. And so, according to the religious belief, they are outcasts. You don't talk to them. It's ironic sometimes you need them, but you don't associate with them unless you need them. Like, for example, if someone is in charge of funeral homes, burning bodies and things like that, you need them because when your relative dies, you need to prepare the funeral, but you don't talk to them otherwise because they deal with the dead and therefore are unclean. They are pariahs, right? So there's that weird aspect of the caste system as well. All right, so the Aryans do not settle in the Indus River Valley. They move to the eastern side of India, which is the Ganges River. So the Indus flows down the northwest side, and the Ganges flows down the northeast side, okay? So this is the other, you have to imagine, this is India here, and this is the other side of India, the Ganges plain, where the Aryans would settle, okay? So they're on the Ganges and the Yamuna rivers. Around 1000 BC is when they first use iron. And again, we haven't really discussed lots of iron yet, but around 1000 BC, many civilizations begin to use the metal that will become the defining metal of many ages, which is iron, right? We go from bronze to iron. And the first kingdom there is the Magadha kingdom around 200 BC, and it spread throughout northern India there. So very powerful kingdoms here in northern India that would be the Aryan kingdoms. All right, so let's look at the Hindu religion for a second. The Hindu religion begins as a mixing of the Aryan and Harappan tradition. They blend together. The Vedas give the voice to the religion, and eventually those Vedas are written down, and the Indus River Valley influence and the Aryan influence comes together to form this amazing and complex religion known as Hinduism. Many scholars believe it is the oldest religion in the world. There's some debate whether or not it is Zoroastrianism or Hinduism. Mostly they began to form around the same time. But Hinduism is the oldest polytheistic religion in the world. And of course, as we know, polytheism means many gods. When we talk about Hinduism, they got gods in spades. They got so many gods, thousands of gods. And we come from a tradition where most of us are monotheistic, and that's fine, but we need to wrap our brain around what polytheism means. Because for much of the world's history, people were polytheistic more than they were monotheistic, even in the West. And now in India, they're still very polytheistic. And so there's no, how to put this, there's no friction or conflict or anxiety of, are we believing in the right thing? Do we believe in the right God? Do we have the right salvation? Because in India, it's open. It's open season on like reincarnation and salvation, and you pick your God and you go with what's good for you, and we won't like argue with that. There's very little religious conflict in that type of belief because it's all about, hey, pick your God and go with it. Like, for example, if a Christian goes to India and says, oh, I believe in Jesus, and the Hindu says, oh, I believe in Jesus too. What they're not telling you is they believe in Jesus, but they also believe in Krishna, and they also believe in Shiva, and they also, bring Jesus along to the party. He'll be fine, right? And so that's that type of mentality where polytheism and monotheism are different, yes? And we'll continue to talk about that as we move through the world religions and how the difference between like a monotheistic religion and a polytheistic religion. A religion that believes that when you die, you are judged, and a religion that believes that when you die, you reincarnate until you get it right, and then you move on, right? There's a big difference there in the stress level of what happens after death when it comes to karma and when it comes to like judgment, right? So let's not digress. So very polytheistic. The religious texts, as we mentioned, were the Vedas. And the Vedas, through stories, it's not a question and answer session, but through stories, the Vedas explain what behavior should be in the ancient world in India. They explain like how a wife should behave and how a husband should behave and how a king should behave. And you learn how a hero should behave and how to fight evil and be good. And so you follow these stories, these complex thousands of verses of a story to try to understand what it means to be a good Hindu, right? Now, as you can imagine, the Vedas are great, but if you're a farmer and you're just living in India trying to get by, you don't have to read like 70,000 verses of a poem to understand what you should do in life. And so Hinduism became a little complicated for just the regular guy. And so the priests decided to make a commentary that explained the Vedas, and they called that commentary the Upanishads. And the Upanishads essentially is a conversation between a teacher and a student, where the student asks the teacher questions about the Vedas, and the teacher answers those questions to give a guide for life. And so it's kind of the most frequently asked questions of the Vedas. And so the Upanishads were there to help the Hindu try to figure out how to live a good life, how to have good karma so they could be reincarnated to a higher caste when they died. And remember our quiz, we explained how Hinduism was a way to help society stay put. There was no societal friction between classes. There was no revolution of lower class trying to become upper class, because Shudras were going to be Shudras, and they were going to be good Shudras, so they could be reborn as a higher caste in the next life because they would have good karma. So reincarnation, karma, moving up, that's what people wanted. Now, to get to enlightenment, let's not get ahead of myself. Oh yeah, here we are. So here are the main terms that we talk about. So let's continue our discussion. The world began with a force, and that force is called the Brahman. And the Brahman lives in all things, right? It is a universal force. So imagine this. At the beginning of the universe, this Brahman force breaks apart and falls to earth and inhabits physical cases like bodies all over the place. So animal bodies, human bodies, the spirit lives in these bodies. Now, that individual spirit is a soul, and that soul is called an Atman. So the Brahman is the universal force. The Atman is the individual force, the soul that lives in all of us. So our origin, according to the Hindu, is the universal force. We begin at the beginning of time here, and we move to here. And then what we do is we die. Like all things die. And our soul moves from body to body until eventually we gain an understanding of the universe and our place in it. And when we do that, we move, if we're good, we move up because we have good karma. If we're bad, we move down because we have bad karma. Now, many times in English we use the word karma, but we don't use it the right way. Like if a guy kicks a puppy and then walks into the street and gets hit by a car, we're like, oh, karma. That's not the way it works. Karma is built up over your life and doesn't really hit you or help you until after you die, right? So you die, and then your karma kicks in to move you up and down the caste ladder so you can reach enlightenment. Now, according to the ancient Hindus, the only people that can really reach enlightenment, which is called moksha to Hinduism, right? You might know it by the more familiar Buddhist term nirvana, but in Hinduism it's moksha. The only way to reach moksha is to be a male of the Brahmin class, right? And so a male of the Brahmin class gives you a shot to reach moksha. But what is moksha? Is it a heaven where you go and you live? Not really. Our soul longs to get back to the universal force, longs to reach its origin. And so when you finally reach that point where you gain an understanding of the universe and your place in it, and you are a male of the Brahmin caste, then you die and you are not reincarnated. Your soul simply blends with the universal force. It's got a very Star Wars sound to it, you know. And I think that's what George Lucas was kind of going for. He kind of read the Brahmin thing, and that's what he went with, right? And so this force that lives in all things can become part of you as well, and when you reach moksha. But until that time, you're constantly reincarnating and reincarnating, trying to reach that spot, the principle, and trying to reach Brahman, the origin, right? So, if someone asks how old you are, you might say, I'm 15, I'm 16. But in Hinduism, no. You are thousands and hundreds of thousands years old, right? You are not a body, you are a soul that's been passing through physical cases over and over again, yes? And your journey, you don't remember your past journey, you don't even remember this journey, but there are hints of that journey in you, and there are lessons that you need to learn. Like, for example, if you were an impatient person in your past life, and maybe you were a very successful businessman, and you worked 70 hours a week, and you did all things, but you had no time for your family, you had no time for friends, you just worked, right? You die, and maybe you would be reborn as a tree, because you get to sit, and you get to look at things, and that's all you would do, and it would teach you patience, and that's what you needed to learn. So you learn things in these lives, and you build them up until eventually you gain an understanding of your place in the universe, and that can get you moksha, okay? So this is how it's supposed to work. Even today, because Hinduism is a religion today that thousands and millions of people believe in, right? And so this is a relevant, it's not just ancient stuff, it's a relevant stuff, right? Okay, so major Hindu gods. Let's run through these real fast and we'll be done. So there are literally hundreds of thousands of gods. They are still creating gods, right? When it's everybody come to the party never ends, and there's more gods and more gods. But these are the main ones, all right? So we talked about the Brahman being the big universal force. And I've got pictures here, so I'm not just going to go through the list. So let's look at this. Brahma is the creator. Now remember we talked about in polytheistic religions all start off as monotheistic. You have a force that creates the universe, then that force will create other gods, demigods, and they create other gods, and all of a sudden you have polytheism. Brahma is that creator force. So Brahma creates the universe. And what's interesting, you say, okay, so Brahma is the most powerful god. We pray to Brahma. No, you don't. Because Brahma creates the world and doesn't do anything else. So praying to Brahma is like praying to a wall. It doesn't work, right? But Brahma is respected for creating the universe and the world, but not necessarily prayed to very much because they don't think that he really gets involved in your lives. He was here to create things, right? So Brahma, the creator. Shiva is the destroyer. So when I say the destroyer, maybe you get the idea that, oh, he's the bad guy, he's the evil guy, he's the devil, or Hades, or something like that. But no, not at all. Remember, we're talking about a culture that believes that things must be destroyed in order to be reborn. And he is the controller of that cycle, which makes him very powerful, right? So we see him in this very common sculpture here, where he is, and of course, if you're familiar with Hindu sculpture and Hindu art, we have multi-armed human figures that move and have many things in their hands, and they all represent something. He has 1, 2, 3, 4 arms in this picture. This is a very common statue that we see in many Hindu homes today, and it's called Shiva, the Lord of the Dance. And the dance is the cycle of death, life, and rebirth. Death, life, and rebirth. So what you have here is a ring of fire. These little hand-looking things are flames, right? And he's moving the cycle of life around with his dance. And at the bottom, he's standing on a demon, keeping evil at bay, making sure the universe works in a balanced cycle. It's very much of a balance in this, kind of a yin-yang, but that's Chinese, so don't get there yet, right? And so he's moving the universe around. So as the destroyer, he serves a very important purpose. He destroys so things can be reborn. So don't think of them as evil, just think of them as necessary, right? Okay. Vishnu. Now, Vishnu is the hero. Vishnu is the protector. Shiva the destroyer, Vishnu the protector. And many people pray to Vishnu. In fact, in many of the Vedas, a lot of heroes are equated to Vishnu. Vishnu has what we call avatars. And so, in a way, it's a god becoming human and coming to earth, or becoming animal or something, some physical form, to come to earth and save the world. And Vishnu, in many of the Vedas, comes and saves the world from natural destruction, from war, from things like that. He is the hero, right? And so Vishnu is, of course, very popular. Many-armed god with clubs and swords and shields and bows in order to protect the people from evil, from enemies. And he also is blue-skinned. You'll see him usually. And Shiva is also blue-skinned as well. And so you'll see it's not dark skin, it's a blue skin or a purple skin that you see in this art. It's very interesting. Now, here we go. This is the Marvel Comics version of Kali. Okay, now, Shiva has a couple of different cohorts, wives, and one of them is Kali. And Kali is not someone you want to mess with. She is a warrior queen, is one way to put it. She is ferocious and vicious. And the story about Kali is that when she goes into a rage, she kills everything around her. And the only thing that can calm her down is Shiva. And Shiva doesn't calm her down by like wrestling her to the ground. Shiva can only calm her down by lying on his back and having her step on him. And when she steps on him, her rage goes into him and he absorbs her rage and she calms down, right? Notice the necklace of skulls. Notice that, this is, again, the Marvel Comics version, but sometimes she has a belt of skulls as well, where she just kills people. Now, who would pray to this goddess? This is a fierce goddess. She's very popular. Hindus pray to her a lot. Why? Because she's a protector. She's the mother bear, right? And if you need protecting, you go to her and say, Shiva or Kali, please be on my side. And she will, and ain't nobody going to mess with you, right? And so Kali's a very popular goddess to pray to. All right, Lakshmi. Well, one of the reasons why Kali's so angry because this is Vishnu's cohort or wife. Vishnu has one wife, right? And so it's a very beautiful Lakshmi. She is the mother goddess as we think of a mother goddess. She is nurturing. She's a nature goddess. She's the god of the rivers and the soil, and she's always seen in a flower petal with all these beautiful things around her. And she is just a very beautiful goddess to pray to help you out. Now, you don't have to choose one. You can pray to many gods. Most people do have a favorite, though, in India, where they pray to this god more than others, but they can pray to any god they want. And Lakshmi is a nice god to pray to for nurturing and help and comfort, things like that. Now, here is Shiva's other wife. And so this is why Kali might be so angry sometimes, is that, she's very pretty. Parvati. And Parvati is the other wife of Shiva, and she is like Lakshmi, a kind of a beautiful mother goddess and nurturing goddess. And they have this child. It's Ganesh. Now, Ganesh is one of the most popular Hindu gods. He has the head of an elephant. The story is interesting, too. One day, Parvati was in the bath and instructed Ganesh, who had a human head at the time, to stand outside the bathroom and not let anyone in. She wanted her privacy. Well, Shiva comes in and says to the boy, "Where's your mother?" And Ganesh says, "You can't go in there. She's having a bath. She won't let anyone in." And Shiva, of course, is like, "You can't tell me what to do, boy." And like a strict father, rips the boy's head off and throws it away. So, stay with me. Parvati comes out of the bath and sees her headless boy and says, "What the heck did you do?" And she was like, "Well, he's giving me lip, so I tore his head off." It's like, "You got to fix this." And so she was like, "Okay, fine." So Shiva goes out and tries to find the head, and it's gone. And so the only head he can find is of a baby elephant. So he sticks it on there and says, "Hey, it's fixed." And so there we have Ganesh, the elephant-headed human god. Very popular in India. Everyone loves Ganesh because Ganesh is that protecting, he's a sacred animal, the elephant, very protecting and nurturing God. You'll see lots of statues of Ganesh in people's homes because he's just so popular to pray to. And these are the major ones. These are the main ones, right? So we don't really have, there are thousands and thousands of others. Every river has a god, and every spirit has a god, and mountains are dedicated to gods. But this is the beginning of that Hindu society that we talk about, and we will continue to talk about throughout this year. That will blend with other cultures like Islam and things like that. But it's still around today, and still a very, very vibrant culture, right? Okay, so that's it for India. Take a look at this before our test. If you have any questions, come and see me, and let's discuss, okay? So, good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow.